This video will cover the final two steps of your hypothesis testing. So once you have your p-value, you need to make a decision. And that decision is entirely based on some significance level that we've set. And that's usually a set amount that we're sort of saying, if anything happens that is less than this value, it's so unusual that we can go ahead and reject the null. So this is something you might want to have on your note card. There's also some cute little sayings that can help you remember. The smaller the p-value, the better the chance you have of rejecting the null hypothesis. But you can also say if the p-value is low, reject the hoe. And the hoe, obviously, in this case, is the null hypothesis. So that's how we use our p-value. If we reject that null hypothesis, that's like us going back and saying the coin isn't fair, or in the Snelling-Parkinson's example, she's not just guessing. Then we have our statistical significance. So rejecting the null is what we want to do. Failing to reject the null is a failure. And we never get to say that we accept the null hypothesis. We can never say a coin is fair or that she is just guessing. All we can say is there isn't enough evidence to show that. Sort of like at the end of a court case example, we never have the opportunity to say the person was found innocent. We just say they were found not guilty, right? There wasn't enough evidence to put them away. So we had our previous examples, oh God, where we had p-values I don't remember because that was the last time I was up. So 0.0069, 0.0475, and 0.1836. All right, so if we look at these different p-values, first thing we gotta do is just determine if they're bigger or smaller than some set alpha or significance level. So some students have some trouble with this. If you need to, think about moving your decimal place over twice, making these into percentages. So like this one will be 1% versus 0.0%. So definitely smaller than our alpha. So here we would reject the null. And every time I reject the null, I like to put a nice exclamation mark because it's what we want to do. 0.04 versus 0.05, well, 0.04 is smaller, so again, p-value is low, we reject the hoe. And the last one, we have 18 versus 10, so that is larger. This is the first one where I'll put my sad face because we would fail to reject the null hypothesis in this example. And again, there's this connection between an unusual z-score, a small p-value, and making something statistically significant versus a not so unusual z-score, a larger p-value, and then failing to reject the null hypothesis. This is just part of the problem, right? This does not, if I went up to my roommate and said I rejected the null, or I went up to, Joy or to the scientists related to that Snelling-Parkinson and said, haha, we rejected the null. People don't know what that means. You need to be able to put this into lay terms. So these are the sentences you're going to want to have available to write. And again, this is always something you probably want on your note card. You're going to say, at a 5% significance level, there is enough evidence to conclude, or there is not enough evidence to conclude. And this is the only place where this fill in the blank gets a little bit harder, is that this is always going to involve our alternative hypothesis in words, regardless of which one it is. Because remember, the whole point of this is to talk about whether or not the person is guilty. So either there is enough evidence to conclude they're guilty, statistical significance, we get what we want, we proved our alternative, or there is not enough evidence to conclude they're guilty. We never make any conclusion about the null hypothesis. So going back to that silly example, the two possible conclusions that we had here is we could have said, I'm going to ignore the significance level. There is enough evidence to conclude. And there's actually two ways we could write this, because if you remember back in that example, we had this, right? P is greater than 50%, right? So we could use this in words, which is going to be a statement about the true proportion, just like it was in our confidence intervals, to include the true proportion And we do need to give context, just like in our confidence intervals. So our true proportion of coin flips that come up heads is more than 50% or 0.5. So that's one way to write it. And that's just really just taking the alternative hypothesis that is a P. What does the P stand for? We have a more than, got it, and then 50% or 0.5. We can also put this more into context. So a different way to say this, we can conclude that and instead of doing this, we could say instead you just say the roommate is cheating, right? Because in context, that's what we were saying. The coin isn't fair. So there are ways in context to shorten this up, but you do want to make sure that you're doing so correctly. And honestly, if we fail to reject the null, the sentence looks exactly the same except for, oops, there is not enough evidence or sufficient evidence, whatever wording, to conclude. And then the wording is exactly the same. There's no change. Again, we're never going to say the coin is fair or that a roommate is not cheating.